It was the early 2000s, a time when life felt simpler and the world seemed a little less chaotic. For Mark and his wife Sarah, weekends were all about family time. Their toddler Lily was the center of their universe, and they loved taking her to a small, secluded lake not far from their home. It wasn't one of those bustling tourist spots, just a quiet, peaceful place where the water shimmered under the sun and the trees whispered in the breeze. The kind of place where you could forget about your worries, even if just for a little while. One particular afternoon, the trio had settled on the beach for a picnic. The air was warm, the kind of warmth that makes you want to linger outside all day. After they'd finished eating, Sarah decided to take a quick dip in the lake. Mark stayed behind with Lily, watching as his wife waded into the water. The sun danced on the surface, making it hard to see much beyond the ripples. But then, something changed. Sarah stopped suddenly, her body stiffening. She turned to face Mark, her expression unreadable at first. Then she shouted something, her voice cutting through the calm like a knife. Mark couldn't make out the words at first, but the tone, it sent a chill down his spine. When he finally understood what she was saying, his blood ran cold. Then she said, "I think I just stepped on someone's face." Mark froze. For a split second, he thought maybe she was joking, trying to spook him. But the look on her face, pale, wide-eyed, and utterly terrified, told him this was no joke. Sarah started moving back toward the shore, her legs churning through the water as if something was chasing her. When she reached the beach, she was trembling. She described how her foot had brushed against something soft and fleshy underwater. At first, she thought it was a rock or a clump of seaweed. But then, she felt at the unmistakable contours of a human face, a nose, an eye socket. She swore she felt the hollow of an eye. Mark's first instinct was to go into the water and check for himself. But something held him back, a deep, primal unease that he couldn't shake. Instead, they packed up their things in silence and left the lake behind, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavy in the air. The next day, the local news delivered a chilling update. A young boy who had been missing for days had been found drowned in the same lake. His body had been discovered not far from where Mark and his family had been picnicking. The timeline was horrifying. He'd been there the whole time, just beneath the surface. To this day, Sarah is convinced she stepped on the boy's face. The days that followed were a blur for Mark and Sarah. The news of the boy's death lingered in their minds like a dark cloud, refusing to dissipate. They couldn't shake the image of that peaceful lake, the sunlit water hiding such a grim secret. Sarah, in particular, was haunted by what she had felt beneath the surface. She replayed the moment over and over in her head, the softness, the contours, the hollow eye socket. It was as if the memory had burned itself into her skin. Mark tried to rationalize it, to make sense of the horror. He told himself it was just a tragic coincidence, that they had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about that day was off. The lake, once a sanctuary, now felt tainted, as if it held secrets it wasn't ready to give up. The police report only added to the unease. According to the authorities, the boy's body had been found in a different part of the lake, not near the public swimming area where Mark and his family had been. But Mark and Sarah couldn't reconcile that with what they knew. They had been there. Sarah had felt it. The body had to have been closer than the police were letting on. Was it a lie to avoid causing panic? Or had the body drifted overnight, carried by the currents to a different part of the lake? Mark didn't know, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. He couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if he had gone into the water that day. Would he have found the boy's body? Would he have been the one to pull it to the surface? The thought made him sick to his stomach. Sarah, for her part, tried to move on. She told herself it was just a tragic accident, something she had no control over. But the memory of that moment, the feeling of stepping on something so undeniably human, stayed with her. She couldn't bring herself to go back to the lake, not even years later. It was as if the water itself had become a reminder of death, a place where the line between the living and the dead had blurred. Years passed and life moved on, as it always does. Lily grew up, the memory of that day fading into the background of her childhood. But for Mark and Sarah, the lake never really left them. It became one of those stories they'd tell in hushed tones, the kind that makes people lean in closer, their eyes wide with elation and dread. Mark often wondered about the boy who he was, how he ended up in the water, and why his body had gone unnoticed for so long. He'd sometimes catch himself staring at old photos of their picnics by the lake, the sunlit scenes now tinged with a sense of unease. That place, once so full of life and laughter, had become a symbol of something darker, something he couldn't quite put into words. Sarah, on the other hand, carried the weight of that day in a different way. She'd occasionally wake up in the middle of the night, her heart racing, the sensation of stepping on that face still vivid in her mind. She'd feel the phantom touch of it, the softness, the hollow eye socket, and it would send a shiver down her spine. She tried to push the memory away, but it was like a shadow that followed her, always just out of sight but never truly gone. The lake itself remained unchanged, at least on the surface. Families still visited, children still splashed in the water, and the sun still sparkled on its surface. But for Mark and Sarah, it was no longer the same. They couldn't look at it without seeing what lay beneath, the hidden depths, the secrets it held. To this day, they don't know the full story of what happened to the boy. Was it an accident? Something more sinister? The questions linger, unanswered, adding to the mystery of that fateful afternoon. And while Sarah has tried to move on, she knows she never forget the feeling of stepping on that face, the moment when the peaceful surface of the lake gave way to something far more terrifying. The lake is still there, quiet and unassuming, its waters hiding more than anyone could ever guess. And for Mark and Sarah, it will always be a reminder of the thin line between the ordinary and the unimaginable, a place where the past lingers just beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. At the edges of Nebraska's largest city, where urban sprawl meets endless cornfields, there's a stretch of road that locals know all too well. It's the kind of place where streetlights are scarce and the darkness feels alive. Back in 2018, a young woman named Sarah would often drive this road to visit her friend's house, one of those newly built mansions that wealthy folks were putting up where civilization met wilderness. Sarah was just 18 then, living the kind of life many young adults dream of, friends with someone whose parents owned a sprawling property complete with four-wheelers, a hot tub, and the freedom to enjoy themselves responsibly. But there was always something about that drive that made her uneasy. The road twisted through dense trees, past one of the city's largest cemeteries, and seemed to swallow all light except for the occasional dim street lamp. The spring night when everything changed started normally enough. Windows down, music playing, the air perfect for a late evening drive. It was around 10 p.m., and Sarah was making her usual trip down that winding road. She'd made this drive countless times before, always speeding past the cemetery section, always feeling that inexplicable urge to get through it as quickly as possible. What she saw that night would haunt her for years to come. As Sarah rounded one of the road's many curves, her headlights caught something that made her slam on the brakes. There, about 50 yards ahead, stood what appeared to be a family in the middle of the road. The scene before her defied all logic. A tall, slim woman, an average-built man, a child who looked about 8, and most disturbingly, a stroller being pushed through the pitch-black night. They were walking in complete silence, facing away from her approaching car. Their clothes looked ordinary enough, neither shabby nor particularly nice. But what struck Sarah as immediately wrong was the absence of any flashlight or reflective gear. These people had been walking in absolute darkness before her headlights found them. Sarah's music faded to background noise as she strained to hear any conversation, any normal family sounds that might make the scene less surreal. But there was nothing, just silence. The family made no attempt to acknowledge her presence or move to the side of the road. They simply continued their strange procession, as if her car wasn't even there. The hair on Sarah's arm stood up as she sat there, frozen in disbelief. Time seemed to stretch like taffy as her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. Something about the whole tableau felt wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then came the moment that would burn itself into Sarah's memory forever. As if responding to some unheard signal, the entire family stopped walking in perfect unison. The synchronization of their movement was unnaturally precise, like puppets controlled by a single string. And then, with agonizing slowness, they began to turn. They rotated towards her car with mechanical precision, all at the exact same pace, all at the exact same time. But what caught Sarah's attention, what would haunt her nightmares for years to come, was the stroller. In that brief moment of paralyzing fear, she could see it clearly in her headlights. It was completely empty. Terror exploded through her body like an electric current. She didn't wait to see their faces. Pure survival instinct took over, and she threw her car into reverse, tires screaming against the asphalt as she backed up for what felt like an eternity. Her hands shook violently as she executed a frantic U-turn, nearly sending her car into the thick forest that lined the road. Her rearview mirror became an obsession as she sped away, checking it countless times for any sign of pursuit. But the family, if that's what they were, had vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. They left no trace, no evidence of their existence, just the cold certainty in Sarah's mind that she had encountered something that defied explanation. Years later, Sarah still struggles to make sense of what she witnessed that spring night. When she finally worked up the courage to tell her friend and his family about the encounter, their skeptical looks only deepened her isolation. The experience had marked her in a way that only those who've brushed against the inexplicable can understand. She's heard all the reactions by now, people calling her crazy, accusing her of lying, or most intriguingly, sharing their own similar encounters in hushed, nervous tones. That stretch of road between civilization and wilderness seems to harbor secrets that few dare to speak about openly. Sometimes, in her quieter moments, Sarah tries to rationalize what she saw. Maybe it was an elaborate prank, she tells herself, some twisted family's idea of entertainment. Or perhaps it was something more sinister, a setup for a crime that her quick thinking prevented. But deep down, in the part of her mind that knows better, she suspects it was something else entirely. Something that exists in that gray space between reality and nightmare, where empty strollers roll through the darkness and families move with impossible synchronization. To this day, she avoids that road after sunset. And when she drives past during daylight hours, she can't help but scan the tree line, wondering if they're still out there, that silent family with their empty stroller, waiting for their next audience in their midnight performance. Let me tell you about a place that looks like a dream, but feels like a nightmare. Picture this, a sprawling 3-story mansion tucked away in the hills. The kind of place that makes you think of the Fresh Prince's Bel Air home or a miniature White House. It's got everything. 13 luxurious rooms with private jacuzzi tubs, a gym, 3 living rooms, a ballroom that doubles as a yoga studio, a massive garden, and even an elevator. But this isn't a 5-star resort. It's a high-end drug and alcohol rehab facility, the kind where the wealthy go to dry out in style. Now meet Alex, a behavioral health technician who started working the night shift here back in September. Alex's shift runs from 11 p.m. to 7:30 a.m., which means most of the time, the mansion is eerily quiet. The clients are asleep, and the only other person around is the nurse, a woman named Jasleen, or Nurse J as everyone calls her. Alex's office is on the 2nd floor, while Nurse J's office, the kitchen, and a huge pantry are on the 1st floor. The pantry, by the way, is always locked, and only Nurse J has the key. During Alex's first week, 2 clients casually mentioned that the place was haunted. Alex laughed it off, thinking it was just the kind of spooky story people tell to pass the time in a place like this. But then, a few weeks in, something happened that made Alex rethink everything. It was the middle of the night, and Alex was sitting in the office, typing away on the computer. Suddenly, Nurse J came stomping up the stairs, her face flushed with anger. She burst into the office and accused Alex of scaring her by hiding in the pantry. Alex was confused. They hadn't left the office all night. When Alex said as much, Nurse J's face went pale. She insisted that someone had been in the pantry, yelling, "Knock, knock." Alex pointed out the obvious. How could anyone get into the pantry without the key? Nurse J didn't answer. She just turned around and walked out. 10 minutes later, Alex heard her talking softly downstairs. Curious, Alex went down to check on her and found Nurse J on her knees in her office, praying in Punjabi. By 6 a.m., the night shift was winding down. The chef and the handyman arrived, ready to start their day. As they clocked in, they asked Alex and Nurse J how the night had gone. Alex, still shaken but trying to lighten the mood, joked, "Casper scared Nurse J in the pantry." The chef's face went serious. "Oh, that's Kay," he said. "If it was in the pantry, that's definitely Kay." Alex was stunned. "Wait, what? Who's Kay?" The chef leaned in, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. He explained that he'd worked at the mansion for 15 years, back when it was a retirement home. A lot of residents had passed away here, and over the years, their spirits had stuck around. Kay was one of them, a friendly ghost who liked to hang out in the pantry. The chef named a few other spirits too, explaining where they'd been seen and assuring Alex that they were harmless. "They've always been kind," he said, "not the malicious type." But Nurse J wasn't convinced. A few days later, she put in her 2-week notice and left for good. Alex, on the other hand, stayed. The pay was significantly higher than average, and Alex's supervisor had admitted that they struggled to keep night shift staff. Alex couldn't help but wonder if the hauntings were the reason. Since then, Alex has noticed other strange things: footsteps echoing in empty hallways, lights flickering for no reason, fireplaces turning on by themselves. But nothing has spoken to Alex directly, not like what happened to Nurse J. The mansion has a way of playing tricks on you. Alex has gotten used to the little things: the creak of a floorboard, the faint hum of the elevator moving on its own, the way the air sometimes feels heavier in certain rooms. But every now and then, something happens that sends a chill down Alex's spine. One night, while doing rounds, Alex heard what sounded like faint laughter coming from the ballroom. When they went to check, the room was empty, the yoga mats neatly stacked in the corner. Another time, Alex was in the garden on a break and saw a shadow move across the second-floor window. When they went back inside, no one was there. The strangest part is that Alex has never felt threatened. The presence or presences in the mansion seem more curious than dangerous. But there's no denying that something is here, something that doesn't belong to the world of the living. Alex's co-workers have their own theories. Some say the spirits are former residents who loved the mansion so much they never left. Others think they're drawn to the energy of the place, a mix of pain and healing that lingers in the air. Whatever the case, Alex has learned to live with it. The pay is too good to walk away, and besides, there's a strange comfort in knowing you're never really alone. But every now and then, when the lights flicker or the fireplace roars to life, Alex can't help but wonder who or what is trying to get their attention.